an effort to better secure Italy from future barbarian attacks, Emperor Claudius and Aurelian traveled to the Balkans to increase the military presence there. But while on campaign, Emperor Claudius contracts the plague.
Claudius's reign was short. He ruled from 268 to 270. He had a signal military success in the year 260.
Forward with more haste than caution, they threw themselves on our squadrons of horse with horrible grinding of teeth and more than their usual fury. Their hair streamed behind them, and a kind of madness flashed from their eyes.
Emperor Claudius is also severely outnumbered, but he has a secret weapon at his side, the powerful cavalry commander, Aurelian.
He was known as Manu ad Ferrum, that is, sort of hand ready to the sword, ready to leap into action when that should be necessary.
True to his name, Aurelian helps Claudius beat back the Alemanni, killing half their force and driving the rest back over the Alps. And in an effort to better secure Italy from future barbarian attacks, Emperor Claudius and Aurelian traveled to the Balkans to increase the military presence there.
On me! Somebody, cover
But
me!
while on campaign, Emperor Claudius contracts the plague.
Claudius's reign was
Guide on me!
short. He ruled from 268 to 270. He had a signal military success in the year 269,
Attention to the
heavily
designated
advertised
grid
at the
zone.
time and much talked about later.
But this success, the defeat of the Alemanni, is not enough to restore the empire. As Emperor Claudius's life slips away, it is clear that this task must fall on his trusted general, Aurelian. He is declared emperor by his troops. Aurelian repays them by sacrificing to the god of soldiers, Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun, a deity now emerging as the god of victory within the army.
Whatever gives you the victory, whatever it is that's going to be beneficial, that's the wagon, as it were, you hitch your star to.
A man of low birth, Aurelian now rises to the highest position in the empire because of his military brilliance, like many great generals before him.
You can't be a civilian emperor by the middle of the 3rd century. You have to lead troops in battle. There's always some place where you've got to go and fight.
Aurelian will need the loyalty of the soldiers and the strength of their god as he faces a familiar enemy. In 271 AD, the bloodthirsty Alemanni returned, ravaging northern Italy and making it as far as Piacenza. Aurelian and his army raced west to cut off the barbarians, sending ahead an offer to negotiate. But the Alemanni have other plans.
He invited the barbarians to give themselves up, but reportedly they replied that they were free men and they could show him how free men can fight. Sure enough, at dusk, in the wooded area south of Piacenza, they ambushed the Roman army, which suffered heavy losses.
In the forest, the Roman soldiers are no match for the barbarians.
Why was an ambush such a successful tactics against Roman troops? And largely the answer lies in the form of organization of the Roman armies. They were trained, the discipline consisted in training them to actually fight in a line, in a formation. And evidently you can do so only when the conditions are met where you can develop that formation, which is not the case in a wooded area. say the barbarians knew that.
Caught in a wooded trap, the Roman army is thrown into confusion and routed. For Aurelian, the defeat is devastating.
The troops are, in some ways, very loyal to their own commanders, but they're also very fickle. So if an emperor is winning, they are happy to support him. Once an emperor starts to lose, then he's almost certainly done for.
Aurelian rallies what troops have survived, praying that they will remain loyal. He needs them now more than ever to keep the Alemanni from reaching the city of Rome. When Rome's frontier armies break away from the rest of the empire, Emperor Aurelian's legions are left helpless against the fierce Alemanni barbarians, now heading into the heart of Italy. Terror grips the people of Rome as they fear the barbarians' arrival is imminent. Desperate, many flee the city.
The defeat of the Roman army, or Aurelian's army, created panic in Rome because there was no serious force to stand between the barbarians and the city.
Those unable to escape riot in the streets, enraged by Aurelian's failure to keep the barbarians out of Italy.
The population of Rome does seem to have understood that becoming a vast city in the midst of an empire whose armies were concentrated at the frontier left them, as it were, peculiarly vulnerable if an army were actually to make it into Italy.
Excellent!
But before the Alemanni warriors can reach the capital, Aurelian is finally able to cut them off at Fanum, 180 miles from Rome. After his recent defeat, Aurelian must win back his army's loyalty with nothing less than absolute victory.
Emperors had always relied upon the support of the army, and emperors may have presented themselves as champions of the republic, but the reality, the underlying reality of imperial powers, it always depends upon the army.
Together, Aurelian and his soldiers teach their barbarian foes a lesson in Roman discipline.
They learned now that whenever there was an opportunity for the Roman army to develop in tight formation, they had no chance.
Overwhelmed, many barbarian warriors die a watery death in the Metaurus River. Aurelian's victory drives the Alemanni from Italy at last.
It also regained confidence, and no doubt his triumph served to boost morale at a time when it had been greatly shaken.
But Aurelian's hard-won triumph in Italy is quickly overshadowed by news of rising conflict from the city of Palmyra on the empire's eastern frontier. For more than 10 years, beginning well before Aurelian's reign, foreign invaders struck hard against Rome's eastern provinces, including Palmyra, threatening to break through the weakening border.
And this ongoing flow of populations, some of whom were highly militarized and used quite different tactics than the Romans were used to, caused very profound problems in the eastern provinces.
On the edges of the Syrian desert, far from the protection of Rome, the people of Palmyra have faced the devastation of their army alone.
These opponents, they also are taking advantage of the absence of the emperor to take over, to roll back the frontiers, which they do successfully, and to extort payments from the Romans.
Counting the bodies of their dead, the Palmyrines finally grew weary of waiting for help from a distant Rome.
These people in these various areas who are threatened by invasion, they wish they were better protected, so they call upon local defenders to take on the role that the emperors seem unable to do, because the emperors can't be everywhere.
In a blatant act of revolt, the Pomerine army took matters into its own hands. As a result, for the past decade, the eastern provinces have called themselves the Pomerine Empire, breaking away from Rome. Now they make a direct threat against Emperor Aurelian by taking the fertile Roman land of Egypt. The rich Egyptian granaries are now controlled by the Pomerine queen. Her name is Zenobia.
We're fascinated by this figure of a woman of the East wielding such control, perhaps a latter-day Cleopatra type. And incidentally, I mean, she did try to associate herself with Cleopatra. When they took over Egypt, she sought to sort of establish a connection in order to reconcile the Egyptians to her rule.
With Egypt under her thumb, Zenobia basks in her power, ordering the granaries to stop shipments of grain to Rome, cutting off one of the empire's main sources of food.
Italy was, of course, the affective heart of the empire. It was where the empire began. But Africa and Egypt had long been the breadbasket of the empire. That's where the agricultural wealth was concentrated.
Queen Zenobia, with her loyal general Zubdus at her side, now holds the empire's grain hostage, sending a clear message to Rome that the Pomerines are powerless no more. Zenobia's power play strikes deep. In Rome, Aurelian finds the people desperate and starving for lack of grain. Though he orders his troops to share their bread with the masses, it is not enough.
Naturally, Egypt was the granary of Rome, and therefore any interruption to the grain supplies to Rome was a huge threat to any emperor, particularly one who had already had strife to deal with in Rome.
The threat of famine leaves Romans restless and angry. Having lost territory to the armies of the East and West, the empire now faces rebellion in Rome itself. Having relieved Rome of the Alemanni barbarian threat, Emperor Aurelian faces a new crisis when the Pomerine usurper, Queen Zenobia, stops shipments of Egyptian grain to Rome, threatening the city with starvation. Soon the Romans turn against their Emperor Aurelian.
Thanks.
The violence, by the way, that these rebellions sparked was on a level not seen since Republican times.
Aurelian has no choice but to unleash his own savage warriors against the insurgents.
You're fighting in Rome itself, you know, and this is civil war. This is something the Romans also fear because they know how divisive it can be and how devastating it can be.
Unaccustomed to battling inside a city, Aurelian soldiers struggle. Though virtually unbeatable on open battlefield, the Roman army once again shows its weakness when tight formation cannot be maintained.
The actual war, the struggle itself, would have been in an urban context. And of course, for the Roman soldiers involved at Aurelian's disposal, this must have been highly unusual. I mean, ancient battles were not typically urban struggles, street by street fighting, and this is where your trained soldiers would have greater difficulty.
But in the end, Aurelian puts down the revolt decisively. The 4th century historian Eutropius.
Aurelian suppressed them with the utmost severity. Several noblemen he condemned to death. He was indeed cruel and bloodthirsty. and rather an emperor necessary for the times than an amiable one.
Aurelian executes the rebel leaders, reminding the people of Rome that he is their ruler. The emperor has crushed the resistance. He now rebuilds the city walls against external forces. Rome will be strong and safe in his hands.
In the aftermath of the military crisis in northern Italy, at the start of his reign, the Emperor Aurelian provided that the city of Rome should be outfitted with a new set of walls. This was the first significant, really significant new set of walls built for the city of Rome since nearly 1,000 years before.
Aurelian now turns to the crisis of the Palmyrene Empire. He must secure his grain supply in order to avoid famine in Rome. His dwindling bread rations will not last forever.
Well, Aurelian was determined to reassert control over all areas of the empire, and so he moves east in 272 to regain control.
His first target is the former Roman city of Antioch, then part of the larger region called Syria. Antioch is a bustling city, invaluable to Rome as a wealthy center of trade. But now, under the control of the Palmyrene Empire, it becomes a safe haven for the fugitive queen Zenobia.
Zenobia and her generals knew for sure that Antioch would be the first city, the first thing Aurelian would have to conquer upon entering Syria. So she barricaded herself in the city, and Zabdas drew the army in the Orontes plain to the west of Lake Antioch.
Zenobia enjoys her prestige, happy to let her generals ready themselves for war just outside the city walls. There, Zenobia's general Zabdas meets Aurelian's army on the battlefield.
You have walls of Romans moving in lines, man to man, fist to fist. You can't kill somebody until you look them in the eye. You've got arms getting cut off, hands getting cut off, damage to the neck, to the face.
But as his infantrymen fall prey to the swords of the Palmyrenes, Aurelian knows his only chance is to outmaneuver General Zabdas.
It is during this battle that Aurelian instructed his highly disciplined light cavalry to perform what later came to be known as the feigned retreat stratagem.
Aurelian's light cavalry pretends to flee, tricking the Palmyrenes into giving chase, leaving the protection of the main lines behind them.
At which point the Roman cavalry turned back and cut them to pieces. In any case, indeed, the Palmyrean cavalry was destroyed, and the road was open to Antioch.
General Zabdas orders the surviving Palmyrene troops to retreat. Zenobia and her generals head toward Palmyra. Aurelian gives chase, determined to catch the queen before she reaches her home city. But in the Syrian desert, Aurelian faces unexpected obstacles.
You have to remember this is summer. It's hot in the desert. So harassed by both the hot summer and the Arab nomads that had remained loyal to Zenobia, Aurelian and his army pursued or pushed to Palmyra.
But an arrow wound delays Aurelian's pursuit, giving Zenobia time to secure herself in Palmyra. Cursing his nomad attackers, Aurelian vows to capture their queen. In 272 AD, Emperor Aurelian defeats Zenobia's army at Antioch. But in pursuit of the fleeing queen, Aurelian is ambushed, allowing her to reach the safety of Palmyra. Now ordered to surrender by Aurelian, who has besieged the city, Zenobia writes him a scathing rebuke in the spirit of her model, Cleopatra.
Whatever must be accomplished in matters of war must be done by valor alone. You demand my surrender, as though you were not aware that Cleopatra preferred to die a queen rather than remain alive, however high her rank.
Despite her bravado, the proud queen knows she is not safe for long in the city. She quickly packs for travel.
Palmyra itself is not really ready for a siege anyway. They built some very hastily erected defenses, and clearly Aurelian has some support inside the city. It does not hold out for very long.
Queen Zenobia and her general Zubdis slip away into the cover of darkness, eluding Aurelian again. In 272 AD, Zenobia races toward Persia, making it as far as the Euphrates River in modern-day Iraq. But Aurelian's soldiers are in hot pursuit. On the banks of the Euphrates, the queen offers the boatmen gold to cross the river, but even her desperate threats are too late to save her.
She was intercepted and captured by the Roman cavalry. They took Zenobia, her advisors and generals, as prisoners of war and put them on trial.
Bound to prevent escape, Zenobia knows she will soon face Aurelian. Having won back the throne of Palmyra, Aurelian finally confronts the rebel Zenobia, a woman whose boldness he can't help but admire. In his own words,
What manner of woman she is, how wise in counsels, how steadfast in plans, how firm toward the soldiers, how generous when necessity calls, and how stern when discipline demands.
But facing likely execution, Zenobia's courage begins to wane.
Zenobia pleaded that she had been led astray by bad advice, on which account her advisor was put to death, and so was the general Zabdas.
Aurelian has a different fate in mind for the beautiful queen once they reach Rome. But before leaving Palmyra, Aurelian visits a temple where he will pay tribute to one god alone, the god of soldiers, Sol Invictus, who has ensured his victory on foreign soil.
He clearly had in mind an alliance between him and the sun god that was responsible for his successes in Palmyra. He presented himself on his coins in terms of an association of the emperor to the god Sol Invictus.
Well, we're moving into this dimension of associating the emperor very closely with one particular divinity, who clearly, given the success that Aurelian had enjoyed, people might believe in.
In the peace of the Eastern Temple, he sees that this is the one God to unite all of Rome.
He does seem to have been participating in a growing trend toward universalism, both in religion and in Roman political control.
Offering his own blood as sacrifice, Aurelian promises his God a nation of worshipers. Having taken back the East and restored Rome's ration of free bread, Aurelian is welcomed back to Rome, a hero.
It may have signaled to the Romans an end to what had been nearly a half century of sequence of military catastrophe, followed by recovery, followed by catastrophe, followed by illusory recovery again.
Aurelian has another purpose in Rome. he will use the riches taken from the east to establish the soldier's god, Sol Invictus, as the single deity of the empire. Work soon begins on a new temple.
He actually put the new cult on a par with the official state religion in Rome. He built a magnificent temple for Sol in Rome, which he furnished with the spoils from Palmyra.
But religion must wait for now. Aurelian has more battles to fight before the empire is fully restored. To the north, the Roman territories of Gaul and Britain have fallen under the unlawful rule of a mutinous Roman army that calls their dominion the Gallic Empire. Resembling their barbarian foes more every day, the Gallic soldiers scorn Roman honor, naming the arrogant Roman general Tetricus their emperor.
You have armies popping up all over the place proclaiming their general's emperor, and then they have to fight, and whoever wins is the one who ends up being the legitimate emperor in the end.
The separation of the Gallic Empire was, of course, frightening for Romans. It was a major loss. It was humiliating to have such a significant portion of the traditional Roman Empire in another man's hands.
Emperor Aurelian quickly moves to take back the Gallic lands and restore the empire to its former glory. All that stands in his way is Tetricus and the Gallic army. Having defeated Queen Zenobia and recovered the east, Aurelian now vows to take back the lost territory in the west from the usurper Tetricus and unite all Romans under one god, Sol Invictus, warrior god of the soldiers. In 274 AD, the mutinous Gallic Empire encompasses both Gaul and Britain. There, the soldier emperor Tetricus and his army have become indistinguishable from their barbarian enemies. Undisciplined, they revel in the torment of their prisoners.
The job of soldier emperor was tremendously dangerous because they're in power only because they are proclaimed by their troops. But it's a very difficult thing once in power to maintain that, because you have to avoid internal conflicts with other potential generals who see themselves as possible emperors.
Tetricus cannot show any weakness to his troops. But in the privacy of his palace, Tetricus consults his advisors, trying to determine where his next rival will come from.
Tetricus himself had survived over the previous several years a number of internal disputes, some actually leading to considerable bloodshed among rival leaders in the Gauls.
He plans to someday leave his kingdom to his son, establishing a dynasty in his own name. But reports of a new challenger now threaten to destroy this dream.
It seems to have been clear to him that in the aftermath of his success in the East, Aurelian was going to and was already marching on Gaul in an attempt to reintegrate Gaul into the Roman Empire.
With news of Aurelian's approach, the volatile Tetricus blames his advisors, lashing out at everyone around him. In 274 AD, Aurelian marches to Chalons, Gaul, in modern-day France, to face Tetricus and win back the western territories for Rome. Aurelian and his men meet Tetricus in the forests of Chalon, where the fighting is fierce.
Aurelian's army probably contained more cavalry than traditional imperial armies had up until now. As for Tetricus's army, well, there were still important legions along the Rhine guarding these areas. It would have been a battle between forces, much similar forces with similar equipment at their disposal, and therefore all the bloodier and more devastating for the armies involved.
It is Tetricus's army that now bears the brunt of Aurelian's vengeance. Having dared to name another as their emperor, it is they who remain the greatest threat.
Part of the crisis of the 3rd century is the importance that the army plays in choosing an emperor. This is something that's relatively new in the Roman world, and it's a result of constant warfare. The army becomes more powerful, it becomes more able to choose emperors, and it becomes more able to impose its own choice of emperors on Rome itself.
Aurelian cannot allow this affront to his power. As Tetricus's army falters, Aurelian orders his troops to cut them down, showing no mercy.
Some sources claim that Tetricus realized the game was up even before the battle, but it looks as though he did fight it out to the end, and it was, in the end, Aurelian who gained the victory.
It is the culmination of his efforts to reunite the empire. In the end, he takes the usurper Tetricus prisoner. And as with Queen Zenobia of Palmyra, Emperor Aurelian spares Tetricus's life.
And for Tetricus too, it was surprising that, particularly an opponent in civil war, opponents in civil wars were usually represented a great danger. They might, after all, turn against you later. So Aurelian displayed remarkable clemency in sparing the lives of both of these opponents.
Tetricus's Gallic army is not so lucky, for it is they who have raised a rival emperor in the West, and now they will pay the ultimate price for their treason.
Aurelian was a great disciplinarian, it seems. He tolerated no mutinies on the part of soldiers. He drove them hard, but was respected by them.
To maintain his own soldiers' respect, Aurelian knows his punishment of the captured Gallic soldiers must be brutal and complete. Not one is spared.
Aurelian was both a successful military commander, and in some respects, as perhaps one had to be, a fairly savage one. And yet, his treatment of Tetricus was remarkably generous.
It is in this generous spirit that Aurelian returns victorious to Rome. There, after 4 years of non-stop campaigning, Aurelian celebrates his reunification of the empire with a spectacular triumph parade, displaying high-ranking captives from every far-off conquest.
There's all sorts of other lore that goes with this ceremony, which mark it out as distinct and in some way both as barbaric and awesome. The presence of the emperor Aurelian in Rome, and the presence of the emperor in order to celebrate an actual military victory, was a novel event for its entire generation.
The defeated usurpers Zenobia and Tetricus are paraded as well, evidence of Aurelian's successes in the East and West.
It was a humiliating spectacle to be paraded through Rome as a captured enemy leader. It implied, as it were, that probably you lacked the courage to have died in battle.
Humiliated though they may be, Zenobia and Tetricus and the other captives are allowed to live by the generous Emperor Aurelian. He also shows his generosity to the people of Rome.
Aurelian himself distributed largely the bread, the pork meat, but also, we are told, white tunics of Egyptian and African cloth. So it was clearly a very generous display of force there.
Grateful in his triumph, Aurelian consecrates the temple he has built for the god of soldiers, Sol Invictus, whose power and favor he believes have made him invincible.
Many scholars believe simply that this was trying to enforce conformity among the peoples of the empire for political purposes and also for religious purposes, and those two things are not that easily separated in the mind of a Roman.
Aurelian decrees this day, December 25th, will be celebrated each year as the birthday of Sol Invictus. Later emperors, also seeking to unite Rome with religion, will adopt this date for the birth of Jesus Christ. Even now, over 1,700 years later, this once pagan holiday is celebrated as Christmas around the world.
Throughout the empire in the 3rd century, there's clearly a movement towards monotheism, towards different cults that believe in a single god, and sometimes in a single redeeming god.
Somebody cover me.
The United Roman Empire now stretches from Palmyra to Britain, but in 275 AD, barbarians again wreak havoc in the east. Aurelian marches his army to Thrace to prepare for battle.
Aurelian is a fascinating figure. He was a very energetic and dynamic individual. If you think of all the places in which he campaigned in his life, he must have had tremendous energy.
It is this drive and energy that earn him the loyalty of his troops.
Aurelian is very successful as a military leader. He knows his troops. He works very effectively with them. I'm sure he rewards them on a regular basis. He can, I think, depend on a significant ongoing support from the soldiers. They trust him. They see him as their leader.
Having brought these soldiers the glory and honor of unimaginable victory, Aurelian never suspects the betrayal that festers among their ranks.
The assassination of Aurelian is again one of these things that's very difficult to explain, particularly at a time when he's been so successful militarily, when the troops should feel satisfied with that success and with their rewards.
Their treacherous act leaves the empire in shock.
As far as we know, the news that the emperor was dead was received with disbelief and a lot of sadness. He was buried with great pomp in a magnificent tomb in the very spot where he was assassinated.
Rome mourns the loss of a great emperor, one who has saved the empire from certain collapse.
Attention to the designated grid.
I think Aurelian's importance lies in the fact that it's the beginning of the Roman recovery, of the, as it were, the central Roman machine coming back to life, and he managed to reunite the empire, to bring it all under his central control.
But in the end, not even the god of soldiers could protect him from the swords of traitors. And the empire he had worked so hard to unite fragments again. barbarians at his doorstep, usurpers on the frontiers, and rebellious subjects in Rome itself. The 3rd century Emperor Aurelian turns to the soldier's own god for help and manages to restore and unite the broken empire. But before his work can take root, he is assassinated, leaving the empire at risk once again. Now, in the troubled days of the late Roman Empire, many rulers vie for power. From this chaos, one man emerges, eliminating his rivals and uniting the empire under the sign of a new god. His name is Constantine, and he will stop at nothing to save a dying empire. Third-century Rome is racked by internal strife and barbarian invasions. But by 295 AD, a powerful new emperor has emerged as the empire's savior. His name is Diocletian.
What Diocletian has chosen to do addresses a number of the concerns and a number of the challenges the empire faced in the 3rd century. One element that Diocletian brings in is a redefinition of the way frontiers were to be defended.
Emperor Diocletian creates a mobile imperial army, always available to send reinforcements to the vulnerable frontier. One of his most capable imperial soldiers is Constantine, only 17 years old.
He was a distinguished soldier. That is to say that he was very courageous in battle and that he performed all sorts of feats of daring do.
These early signs of greatness in Constantine have not escaped the notice of Emperor Diocletian. Diocletian keeps the young soldier close at hand, claiming a desire to groom Constantine for a position of power within the empire. Diocletian's other major reform is to divide the empire between 4 co-emperors, one each in Illyricum and Italy, while Constantine's father rules from Gaul. Diocletian himself governs from Nicomedia in Asia Minor. But Diocletian knows how easily his chosen co-emperors could turn on him. To prevent this, he keeps their sons, including Constantine, in his court, where they are trained as master soldiers under his watchful eye.
Constantine was sent off to the court of Diocletian to obtain the proper education for a member of the upper class, a literary education, philosophical education. He learned Greek, which he wouldn't have known, but most important, he had a military education.
But Constantine's life in court is anything but comfortable, for as a father figure and an emperor, Diocletian rules with an iron fist.
He begins to rule increasingly by issuing a whole series of extremely heavily moralizing edicts, telling people what to do, telling them how to be better citizens, and so forth.
Diocletian insists that everyone at court, including Constantine, make regular sacrifices. For above all, Diocletian believes unity in the empire comes from appeasing Rome's pagan gods. But another religion is gathering many converts, putting Diocletian's plans at risk. Its followers worship the son of a new god, Jesus Christ.
The church had not only grown numerically, but it had also grown quite wealthy. It had come to control large buildings. It was, in many ways, a thriving institution within the Roman Empire.
An institution that Diocletian believes is a threat to Rome.
He was extremely concerned that the health of the state and the health of Rome itself was tied up with Roman religion, and Christians were a threat to that. Christians who had been tolerated for nearly 40 years were clearly a large percentage of the population in big cities, and it's clear that there were Christians in the army and there were Christians in the imperial court.
Diocletian begins in his own imperial army, where he requires that all soldiers make sacrifices to the gods of Rome, though many Christians refuse.
Diocletian believed that anything that interfered with the cultivation of Rome's protecting gods was a genuine threat to the state and could destroy the state, from within. This is the way he looked upon Christians in the army.
Punishment for rejecting the emperor's edict is death, a brutality that Constantine, as a soldier in Diocletian's army, is forced to witness. Constantine grows troubled by the fear and discord born of Diocletian's reforms. It is a discord that will soon spread beyond the army. In 303 AD, Emperor Diocletian issues an edict against all Christians that becomes known as the Great Persecution.
As soon as the persecution edict was issued, it unleashed what is virtually a culture of administrative cruelty. Roman officials, in carrying out the edict, when they met resistance, were expected to bring the defendants to court and to torture them for evidence and try to force them to officially and publicly give up their Christianity.
The Great Persecution marks the beginning of what the Christians call the era of martyrs. Any Christian who proclaims his faith in public is subject to death.
In many ways, Diocletian's persecution brought previous persecutions way forward. It's probably the closest Roman emperors came to destroy the entire system. That is probably why so many martyrs commemorated by the Christian Church are said to have suffered for Christ during Diocletian's reign.
Despite his reservations about the persecutions, Constantine must stay on good terms with the man who will likely determine his future. But when Diocletian unexpectedly falls ill and is forced to retire, Constantine is surprised to find himself shut out of the succession plan.
Diocletian, it seems, understood that Constantine represented something of a threat. Constantine had campaigned with Diocletian and had done a reasonably good job during these campaigns. We're told that later in his life, Diocletian actually had imprisoned Constantine in his court to prevent Constantine from going to his father's court and establishing a relationship with his father's army.
But now, with nothing left to keep him in the east, Constantine resolves to grab hold of his destiny and finally escape Diocletian's grasp. Constantine travels from Nicomedia to Boulogne, Gaul, to meet his father, who now rules Spain, Gaul, and Britain. Constantine's father, Emperor Constantius, is by now old, unwell, and troubled by the extended absence of a son he longs for. But in 305 AD, Constantine is finally united with his father, a man more like him in nature than Diocletian ever was.
Constantius, as far as we can tell in the West, was a good deal more relaxed in his approach to government, and he certainly found that it was quite possible to ignore some of the things that Diocletian told him to do.
Constantine finds in his father a more compassionate leader, and Constantius finds his son has grown into the kind of man who could one day take his place on the throne. When Emperor Diocletian retires in 305 AD, Constantine is finally released from his controlling grip and free to join his aging father Constantius in the west. One of Rome's 4 co-emperors, Constantius rules over Spain, Gaul, and Britain, now threatened by barbarian Picts. In 305 AD, he and Constantine traveled from Cologne to Britain to put down the rebellion. The Picts are a ferocious tribe in present-day Scotland that has long plagued Roman Britain. In battle, these bloodthirsty barbarians present a serious challenge for Constantine and his father.
These barbarian neighbors in the 4th century are much better organized than they had been in previous generations. The Roman armies faced far more difficult campaigns in Europe than they previously had.
To make matters worse, Emperor Constantius's health is in serious decline.
The ailing emperor, he clearly was sick by the time he had to come with his son to face the danger of the Picti, had gone on to this campaign, is yet another indication of how serious the threat was.
With Constantius's health in question, it is up to Constantine to lead his father's troops and secure their allegiance in battle.
When Constantine rejoined his father in the west, Constantius made sure that he began to assume a place in the higher command echelon, that he joined the army on campaign, that the soldiers came to know him, and that he would actually have a natural place within the administration of the Western Empire. This had always been Constantius's hope for him.
Follow me.
With his military prowess, Constantine wins the loyalty of the army. But the victory cannot save his father's life. In the end, Constantine will lose the father he has only just come to know.
When his father died, the army thought enough of Constantine that they immediately acclaimed him emperor. In a way, this is a natural occurrence. It was an army that knew Constantine's father, respected Constantine's father, and now knew the son as well. They understood, in a sense, what they were getting with Constantine.
In an empire where the death of a ruler too frequently leads to violent coups and ambitious plays for power, Constantine's succession is smooth and bloodless. But when barbarian Franks attack Gaul in 306 AD, Constantine faces his first challenge as emperor. He heads south from Britain to meet them in battle.
The Franks clearly understood the death of Constantius was an opportunity, and an opportunity that they could take advantage of. Constantine, though, demonstrated a great capacity as a commander and beat back this initial incursion.
As a new emperor, Constantine wastes no time proving his worth.
The emperor was expected to be in personal command of the army and was very often expected to be in command in the front rank. Constantine seems himself to have been a very capable frontline soldier. He's often seen to be leading cavalry charges in his battle. He's a very able tactician.
He is also wise and knows that to establish his power, he must win the trust of the populace as well. The captured Frankish leaders provide the perfect opportunity to do just that. Constantine parades the barbarian captives in the streets of Trier, in modern-day Germany, to show his people he will protect them.
Constantine's well aware that the primary objective of any emperor at this point, if he wants to gain and hold power, is to fight with barbarians. So Constantine does this in grand fashion. Constantine undertakes campaigns against the Franks, and we have evidence that he captured a couple of Frankish kings whom he then put on display in the arena for the delight of the Gallic masses.
Ultimately, the barbarians will be thrown to the beasts, sending a clear message that Constantine will not tolerate those who threaten the Roman Empire. But in 306 AD, the empire is threatened from within when a usurper named Maxentius seizes power in Rome, declaring himself emperor and taking control of most of Italy and North Africa. The usurper Maxentius wins support by promising to cut taxes and provide free grain to the people of Rome. Like Constantine, he is the son of a former co-emperor.
Constantine was proclaimed emperor by the troops in July of 306, and Maxentius is sitting in Rome, is thinking, well, he's emperor, I want to be emperor too. And so what happens is at the end of 306, he's proclaimed emperor.
But unlike Constantine's, Maxentius's claim to the throne is not legitimate. Maxentius defeats, imprisons, and eventually murders the rightful co-emperor of Italy. And soon the people of Rome will learn his promises are nothing but lies. In 311 AD, the Romans revolt when the free grain and tax cuts are only offered to the wealthy. Ordinary citizens must steal what they can to survive.
Maxentius is not a popular leader. He was a particularly ruthless leader. He put down revolts very bloodily. There were rumors going around that he was seducing senators' daughters. There were problems with grain supply. He was taxing people, which they'd never been taxed before in Italy.
The desperate uprising of Rome's oppressed masses offers an unexpected opportunity for Constantine. Hoping to save the people of Rome and expand his own reach into Italy, Constantine travels from Gaul to Milan to strike a deal with another co-emperor, Licinius. It is a deal to consolidate power. To seal their alliance, Licinius is betrothed to Constantine's sister.
Constantine played every game in the book. He was an extremely ambitious person, and there was no avenue to power that he was going to leave open. That meant that in his early years, he was willing to do all sorts of manipulations to try to continue to climb the ladder.
Together, Licinius and Constantine tricked their co-emperors in the East into believing their intentions are only to oust Maxentius.
Constantine looks to take advantage of the situation and starts calling Maxentius an illegitimate emperor and a usurper. Constantine and his supporters justify an invasion against Maxentius as a necessary removal of a tyrant from the city of Rome.
But once Rome is secure, Constantine and Licinius will set their sights on seizing control of the entire empire. In 306 AD, when the usurper Maxentius seizes power in Rome, Constantine strikes an alliance with his equally ambitious co-emperor Licinius to destroy Maxentius and divide the empire between them. While Licinius is occupied with defending the empire's northern border from barbarian invaders, Constantine marches on Rome, laying siege to the imperial city where Maxentius hides. Within the walls of Rome, the devout pagan Maxentius will base his strategy on the sheep entrails, read by his priest.
When it came time to fight a battle, Maxentius was interested in having some sort of divine protection, and he followed the procedures that any good Roman emperor would have followed in order to seek that protection.
But desperate to determine if he should wait Constantine out or face him in battle, Maxentius also seeks guidance from the words of the Sibylline prophecies.
One of the sources that Maxentius turned to were the Sibylline oracles. These were books of prophecies that were kept by Roman priestly colleges, and these priests would then investigate certain questions and pull out an oracle.
This is an oracle in which he's told that an enemy of Rome will die today. For this reason, it seems Maxentius changes his plan and makes a decision that he won't wait Constantine out, he will go out and meet Constantine in battle.
Assuming that Constantine is the enemy of Rome referred to by the oracle, Maxentius prepares his army for war. Meanwhile, just outside of Rome, Constantine prepares to meet Maxentius on the battlefield. Knowing his troops will be severely outnumbered, Constantine grows uneasy.
Constantine began to get very concerned about the strength of his forces, and we're told he prayed that some god would help him and received a vision in response. And this is interpreted by Constantine as a Christian vision.
The 4th century historian Eusebius of Caesarea records what is supposed to have happened, as recounted to him by Constantine himself.
Around noontime, when the day was already beginning to decline, he saw before him in the sky the sign of a cross of light. He said it was about the sun, and bore the inscription,
What he claims to have seen was a symbol that looked like a cross with a sort of P form at the top of it. That is the letters Chi Rho that would have formed the first 2 letters of Christ's name in Greek. And there are some sources that claim that he also heard a voice at the same time that said that he would conquer by this sign.
Constantine orders his soldiers to place the Chi Rho on their shields and standards, transforming the Christian symbol from an object of persecution to one of honor.
Constantine assumed a new god, or a god that had formerly been rejected, as his divine force, as his victory power. By taking on the Christian god, the god that had been subjected to persecution by former emperors, Constantine was therefore doing something quite revolutionary.
With his conversion, Constantine turns his impending battle with the pagan Maxentius into a test of religions. Constantine meets Maxentius at the Milvian Bridge, which, passing over the Tiber River, is the only obstacle between Constantine and an open road to Rome. Though grossly outnumbered by Maxentius, Constantine and his army, now marked by the Christian Chi Rho, ride into battle with courage.
The Battle of Milvian Bridge is a significant battle. The forces are arrayed against each other, and despite a numerical advantage, Maxentius's forces are pushed back by Constantine towards the river.
It is at the banks of the Tiber that Maxentius's fate is sealed.
Constantine forced Maxentius to give battle with the Tiber at his back. It's a terrible position to be in, and as Constantine's force pressed in on his own, Maxentius's army fell apart.
With no other options, the usurper Maxentius flees with his army, attempting to swim across the Tiber River to Rome. But Maxentius, with his heavy armor weighing him down, does not survive the swim. Days later, his bloated and deformed body is pulled from the Tiber, final proof that the usurper's regime has fallen.
Constantine has won a significant victory at Milvian Bridge that eliminates the opposition of Maxentius, and even more significantly, gives Constantine control of a full half of the empire, including the wealthy province of Italy.
Maxentius's fate is a powerful reminder of Constantine's strength and of what befalls those who dare to oppose him.
Attention to the designated grid zone. On me. Attention to the designated grid zone. The enemy's getting closer to victory. Roger that. Attention to the map. Thanks. On me. Excellent. Guide on me. Affirmative. Attack the A point. Thank you. Attention to the designated grid zone. Attack the A point. Affirmative. Attention to the map.
Constantine went out of his way to dredge his body out just so they could parade his head through Rome and then send it to North Africa to demonstrate that this previous emperor was dead and Constantine had now taken over.
His victory over Maxentius also proves to Constantine that the Christian God is more powerful than the pagan gods of his enemy. With the defeat of Maxentius, all of the Western Empire belongs to Constantine. As agreed, he leaves the east for Licinius to take. They meet in Milan, where Constantine and Licinius confirm their mutual support through marriage as planned.
Constantine decides to bind himself to Licinius, or bind Licinius to his cause. He takes one of his half-sisters, Constantia, and marries her to Licinius, who recognizes that this is the natural way of making an alliance.
Now, to begin with, the marriage itself actually marks the point at which the two, Constantine on one hand and Licinius on the other, agreed on the policies.
One of these policies reflects Constantine's recent adoption of Christianity.
The two emperors consulted on how they would carve out the power between them, and one element in this decision was to extend toleration for Christianity throughout the whole empire. Licinius was not a Christian himself, although he agreed with Constantine to stop persecution throughout the empire.
For now, such agreements come easily, but an alliance born of ambition is fragile, and Constantine must recognize that his sole co-emperor is also his greatest rival. After forming an alliance with Emperor Licinius, Constantine defeats the usurper Maxentius in Italy. Now convinced that the Christian God granted this victory, Constantine is determined to show his appreciation. For the first time in 10 years, Christians throughout the empire are able to worship freely, and for the first time ever, their faith is shared by the emperor.
Constantine had converted to Christianity. He had embraced quite seriously the task of defending the Christian church.
His family, including his son and heir, Crispus, converts as well.
Constantine not only extended toleration to the Christian church, but in the territory he controlled, he favored Christians very thoroughly.
In 313 AD, Constantine and Licinius jointly issue the Edict of Milan, recorded by the 4th century author Lactantius.
We grant both to Christians and to everyone freedom to follow whatever religion they want to. So whatever divinity there is in heaven may be appeased and made favorable to us and to all who are set under our power.
But in the years that follow, Constantine's relationship with Licinius deteriorates. As Licinius battles his way to dominance in the east, his hunger for power grows.
So Licinius goes off and does his own thing, as it were, in the east, but Constantine doesn't trust him, and there are growing tensions between the two.
After 9 years of shared rule, both emperors covet control over the entire empire. It is a rivalry that will quickly drive Rome towards civil war. In the east, Christians soon bear the brunt of the growing conflict. As supporters of the Christian emperor Constantine, they are now Licinius's greatest threat. They pay a heavy price.
one of the responses was a renewal of persecution. And the reason for that, of course, was very simple. Constantine was known to be a defender of Christians, and Christian subjects of Licinius could look like a fifth column, could look like enemies in Licinius's own territories. So he chooses to persecute them.
As the churches and holy books go up in flames, so does the old alliance between Licinius and Constantine. For Constantine, now a seasoned ruler of middle years, the persecution of Christians is just the excuse he needs to attack Licinius. He quickly orders his troops to march on his eastern rival.
Constantine was an especially effective cavalry leader. We often find himself at the head of cavalry, moving around the flanks of his enemy. He certainly does this to Licinius.
At Constantine's side is his able son and heir, Crispus, who proves his worth in battle as well. Together they drive Licinius eastward. From Adrianople, Constantine and Crispus pursue Licinius to Byzantium and on to Chrysopolis, where he makes his final stand. There, in 324 AD, with the entire empire at stake, Constantine and Crispus face Licinius side by side.
Somebody, cover me!
Crispus inherited his father's ability on the battlefield. Crispus was another military genius. Without Crispus's help, the success against Licinius may never have happened.
Constantine and Crispus annihilate Licinius's army, fighting once more under the banner of the Christian God.
The Battle of Chrysopolis was really over before it began. Constantine was able to bring his own troops into the territory of Licinius without any kind of effective resistance. His own army had been victorious now easily in several battles. Licinius's own confidence seems to have been minimal.
And in the final battle, their victory wins Constantine's sole rulership of the entire empire. Eusebius, Bishop of Caesarea.
The eastern regions were united with those of the west, and the whole body of the Roman Empire was graced by a single and supreme ruler.
Imprisoned at Nicomedia, Licinius will face a brutal punishment. The only witness is his beloved wife, the sister of Constantine.
His relationship with Licinius is interesting. Licinius is technically, remember, his brother-in-law. Licinius's wife pleads for mercy for her husband. For a while, Constantine seems to grant that sort of clemency. They share a meal. Licinius is sent into exile. Then he's executed.
Despite his wife's pleas, Licinius's execution is swift and bloody, making clear that Constantine shows no mercy, even to members of his family. With the elimination of Licinius, Constantine now rules the entire unified empire and intends to make his loyal son Crispus a junior emperor in the west. As co-emperor, Crispus shares in his father's plans for a new Christian capital in the east, to be located at Byzantium.
After Constantine conquered the entire empire, he wanted to create a brand new city with his own name. And he did, Constantinople. He chose a strategic location halfway between the most important frontiers, and he deliberately chose to create a new city that would have no association with his pagan predecessors. It was a city that had no rival traditions. It was a Christian city.
But even as his greatest dreams come to fruition, trouble brews among those closest to Constantine's heart. His wife Fausta and son Crispus.
Crispus was the son of Constantine's first wife. His last three sons were the sons of his second wife, Fausta. And there can't help but have been some kind of tension between the two groups, especially on Fausta's side, because she would clearly want her sons to get what's coming to them, but of course Crispus is in the way.
Jealous that Crispus has been granted power in the West, Fausta is determined to secure even greater power for her sons, no matter what the cost. With his son Crispus, Constantine defeats his last rival, Licinius, and finally unites the empire under his new Christian faith. But Constantine's unity is soon threatened as riots break out over religious differences within the Christian church.
Attention to the map!
The situation he finds among Christians in the Eastern Empire is one of great turmoil. There's a controversy raging about the nature of Christ that is also tied up with the question of who ought to have authority in the Eastern Church.
Rival bishops incite mob attacks against other Christians with opposing beliefs. It is a violence not seen since the days of persecution over 20 years earlier. Desperate for a resolution, Constantine demands the church officials put an end to the bloody controversy.
So he calls together a council of over 300 bishops and has them meet at a city called Nicaea. He charges them with arriving at a single definition of what Christians believe.
The result is the Nicene Creed, a statement of faith that has survived over 1,600 years and is still recited today in Christian churches around the world.
We believe in one God, the Father Almighty, maker of all things visible and invisible, and in one Lord Jesus Christ, the Son of God, the only begotten of the Father.
Attention to the map!
But it's a definition of Christian belief that not everyone can agree with. And this stores up a great deal of trouble for the future, because it means that rival Christian beliefs are constantly jockeying for imperial favor throughout the rest of the century. And it means that emperors are regularly distracted from other business of government by trying to manage the rivalries among different Christians and different Christian bishops.
Perhaps it is this distraction that blinds Constantine to a rivalry much closer to his heart. In 326 AD, Constantine's wife Fausta attacks the integrity of his son, Crispus.
Crispus was Constantine's eldest son from an early marriage, and he did not have the same mother as his half-brothers had. And it's quite clear that he was in rivalry with his three younger half-brothers.
As part of an elaborate plot, Fausta delivers shocking news, claiming that Crispus has tried to seduce her.
Things don't go very well for Crispus at all. Fausta was eager to get Crispus out of the way, so her legitimate sons could succeed without threat from Crispus.
Constantine, unable to see that it is his wife, not his son, who has betrayed him, orders Crispus to be prepared for execution. Imprisoned in distant Pola, modern-day Croatia, Crispus insists on his innocence. Though his cries fall on deaf ears, he has an advocate in Constantine's court.
Constantine received advice from his own mother, Helena, that perhaps it was Fausta herself who had engineered this intended to be been set upon by Crispus in order that she, Fausta, could promote the interests of her own sons. Constantine had certainly acted too hastily and was aware of that.
Fausta pays for her treachery with her life. But Constantine's realization comes too late for Crispus. The prison guards have already received their orders to execute the royal son.
What exactly happened, we don't know. But it was a terrible blow to the Roman Empire that Crispus was sacrificed on the altar of history.
And Constantine is left only with a devastated conscience. As a sort of penance, Constantine spends the last years of his life building churches in Jerusalem, Bethlehem, Constantinople, and Rome. Among the most magnificent of these churches is one built on the site thought to be St. Peter's tomb in Rome, a place of pilgrimage for Christians to this day.
It is for his churches that Constantine is better known. That in itself is an indication both of his pro-Christian policies and of the attachment to the Christian faith.
Refusing to abandon this faith despite its ongoing disputes, Constantine directs the construction of the glorious Basilica of St. Peter himself.
Guide on me!
It's an extraordinary explosion of architecture in a way that did not exist before in the Roman Empire. And the variety of plans could be explained both by the variety of architects that Constantine involved in this, and most likely by his own ideas. He was involved in almost every project there, and he was a man that actually had his own ideas about what's going on.
Constantine can only hope that this devotion at the end of his life will erase a multitude of sins. For Constantine knows that his day of reckoning is not far off. Old and unwell, he finally requests baptism in 337 AD.
It would make sense for Constantine to delay his baptism because emperors had a dangerous and dirty job. Sometimes they had to do difficult and sinful things as a consequence of their job. To delay baptism until the end of one's life made some sense. Those dangerous and dirty and sinful things that one had to do could be washed away before he died.
Leading for landing.
Haunted by these sins, Constantine wants nothing more than to die with a clean conscience, purified by the waters of baptism.
By the end of his life, Constantine is something of a sort of living visionary who, at the point when he's baptized, wanted to take off his imperial robes and live ever thereafter as a sort of priest.
At the end of his life, Constantine finally finds peace in the faith he wrote about throughout his life.
I know that I am in the true sense blessed, that now I have been shown worthy of immortal life, that now I have received divine light.
Constantine dies in May of 337 AD, after more than 30 years of rule.
Constantine was tremendously successful as an emperor, tremendously successful as a military leader. This was a man who clawed his way into power using raw ambition, and at every turn he used that same ambition in order to win the day.
Throughout his life, Constantine fights to keep the fragile empire whole, unified under his new religion. But nothing, not even faith, can save it now. Empire ravaged by barbarians and torn apart by rival emperors, one man rises victorious. His name is Constantine. Fighting under the banner of a new god, he brings unity to a divided Roman Empire. Now, as its armies are defeated and emperors slain by barbarians, Rome is on the brink of disaster. In this chaos, two mighty leaders emerge, one from within the empire, the other from the ranks of its enemy. Their struggle will reveal an empire at war with itself. On the edges of the empire, Roman soldiers march off to defend the frontier villages from attack. A young boy named Stilicho proudly watches his father among them.
Stilicho was the child of a mixed marriage, as it were. He had a Vandal father but a Roman mother, and this meant that he grew up in a sort of context that was half barbarian and half Roman. This was not atypical of people in this period, and above all, of people who were associated with the army.
Stilicho dreams of becoming a soldier like his barbarian father, fighting to protect the great empire.
By this time, a sizable percentage of the officer corps was of what you might call barbarian ancestry. These are men who were recruited, worked their way up the ranks. The next generation, they become the generals.
As ever fiercer tribes invade the empire, Rome's dependence on barbarian mercenaries grows by the day. Under pressure to protect its expansive frontiers, the empire divides in two. The west is defended by Emperor Valentinian in Rome, while Emperor Valens defends the east in Constantinople. But Valens is challenged in 378 AD when a savage enemy attacks the city of Adrianople. They are the Goths, and what they want is Roman land. They intend to destroy the Roman forces with muscle, steel, and fire, knowing the heavily armored Romans will quickly feel the heat as the battlefield burns.
The Goths were far more numerous, and they had a lot to fight for. They'd been badly treated by the Romans, they'd been sold into slavery, they really had nothing to lose.
During the Battle of Adrianople, Emperor Valens' soldiers are no match for the savage and relentless barbarian warriors.
They attack, and everybody is pushed to the right. The Romans always edge to the right anyway, because you want to keep that right shoulder under the shield of the guy next to you. Now this is accelerated. Everybody compacts around the emperor because he's on the far right, the point of honor, and his men won't move. So we have this acceleration, this compactor process. The Goths come out of this circular deployment and surround the Romans and cut them down.
The Emperor Valens himself falls on the battlefield, forced to fight for his life. It is a fight he quickly loses, sending his shocked soldiers into panicked retreat.
When an ancient army breaks, mass slaughter always ensues. What made Adrianople even worse was that the Roman army was partly surrounded, and not everybody could run, so that in their haste to get away, Roman soldiers ended up killing one another, trampling on one another, and suffocating to death, simply in the vast confusion.
2/3 of the Roman army is lost. The late Roman historian, Ammianus Marcellinus, describes the carnage.
Arrows whirling death from every side always found their mark with fatal effect, since they could not be seen beforehand or guarded against.
The The Battle of Adrianople is a turning point in Roman history. It's a turning point from which the empire cannot return. The army is largely gone, and there's no way of getting it back except to use the barbarians themselves.
The new Eastern Emperor, Theodosius, does just that. He invites the Goths to a banquet, offering them land in exchange for military service. At his side is Stilicho, now a Roman general in his early 20s.
Stilicho was half a barbarian, as it were. He was half Vandal, half Roman. And as is typical for so many of these kinds of guys, he worked his way up through the army.
Emperor Theodosius relies on Stilicho to handle negotiations with the Goths, whom he plans to use as mercenaries.
The conditions that the Goths achieve from Theodosius are highly unusual because it puts them in a stronger position than they might have expected. The most important thing is that they're not broken up. The Goths who have been fighting Theodosius are all settled in one place. And they're settled in one place without being put under Roman control.
Stilicho brokers the deal. In exchange for this land, the entire Gothic force agrees to fight as soldiers in Theodosius's army. Though Stilicho is himself a half-barbarian, Theodosius trusts him like a son and has no doubts.
Stilicho was very good at what he did. He distinguished himself. He came to the attention of the emperor. And so as he worked his way through, he got higher and higher and was in command of a large contingent of Theodosius's army.
But Stilicho's position does not make him next in line to rule. That honor falls on the emperor's biological sons, Arcadius and Honorius, who is born in Constantinople in 384 AD. Yet Stilicho enjoys a royal connection as well.
Stilicho was actually closely related to the Emperor Theodosius. He had clearly been selected from among the many barbarian or semi-barbarian generals as a future leader. So much so that the Emperor Theodosius had married Stilicho to his own niece, and this marriage was a strong point in cementing Stilicho's relationship with the imperial house throughout the course of his life.
Though chosen by the emperor to lead, Stilicho's power will always be limited.
As a barbarian or a half-barbarian, there was no way he was going to be emperor. That was it.
Nonetheless, Emperor Theodosius knows he can rely on his most trusted general to help manage the Eastern Empire's biggest problem, the Goths. To solidify Emperor Theodosius's new treaty, Gothic boys are sent to training camps to be instructed in Roman military ways.
What is clear is that they weren't fully Roman subjects, but that they were obliged to serve the Roman army when the Roman emperor called on them to do so.
As Theodosius's right-hand man, Stilicho ensures the young Goths are well-trained and loyal. There is one whose natural talent catches Stilicho's attention, the boy Alaric.
Alaric had probably been born inside the empire, and he'd probably been raised inside the empire with full awareness of what a Roman military career was like.
Taking Alaric under his wing, Stilicho cannot begin to imagine how their fates will be intertwined. Over the next decade, The Eastern Empire grows stronger under the combined rule of Stilicho and Emperor Theodosius. But their authority is jeopardized when a betrayal in Vienne, Gaul, rocks the Western Empire in 392 AD. While sleeping in his palace, the Western Emperor Valentinian II is murdered by his barbarian guardian Arbogast, who then disguises the death as a suicide.
The emperor was the symbol of Rome's empire itself, and so the death of somebody around whom the state was structured, symbolically structured, is a tremendous psychological blow.
Worse still, the Western Empire and its army fall under the control of the ambitious barbarian Arbogast. The usurper is now a threat to the Eastern Empire as well. Without delay, the Eastern Emperor Theodosius leads his army westward to confront the usurper. He calls upon his trusted general Stilicho to prepare the troops for battle.
Stilicho was master of the soldiers in Thrace and was in command of a large contingent of Theodosius's army at the time.
Stilicho recruits the young Alaric, now a full-grown chieftain, and his tribesmen to fight alongside the Romans. By now, about a quarter of the Roman army is made up of barbarian mercenaries.
The Romans had become extremely reliant on non-Roman manpower with non-Roman leadership in a way that could potentially become very dangerous for the empire.
Emperor Theodosius planned to destroy the usurper Arbogast and weaken the Goths in one powerful blow. In 394 AD, Theodosius leads his eastern army, including Alaric's Gothic troops, against the forces of the Western Roman Empire, now led by the power-hungry traitor Arbogast. The battle takes place in 394 AD at the river Frigidus in modern-day Slovenia. There, confronted with Arbogast's army, Emperor Theodosius orders Alaric and his Goths into battle first, preserving his Roman troops.
He almost certainly deliberately put them on the front lines for the very first engagement, knowing that that was the most dangerous position for them. He probably hoped that as many of them would die as possible and yet still achieve victory.
The Goths fight for their lives. But Arbogast's forces, hungry for blood and booty, cut them down. Just as defeat seems imminent, a fluke of the weather changes everything.
It just so happened that the way that the troops were lined up, the winds were blowing very much against the forces of Arbogast and for the forces of Theodosius, so that the projectiles that were shot and thrown on the part of Arbogast's army failed to reach or have any effect on Theodosius's army.
With this advantage, Emperor Theodosius defeats Arbogast soundly. But in the process, he has made a dangerous new enemy. As Alaric searches the bodies of the fallen Goths for survivors, Theodosius's betrayal cuts deep.
When the Goths were put on the front lines and used as cannon fodder or missile fodder for the troops of Arbogast, Alaric must have been furious.
Never again will Alaric allow his people to be mere casualties of Roman glory. While Theodosius celebrates his victory at the Frigidus and becomes the sole emperor of Rome, Alaric and the Goths take their vengeance, ravaging the Balkans for food and booty. There, Roman farmers, unarmed and vulnerable, are completely unprepared for the wrath of the Goths. Their harvest is exactly what Alaric needs.
Alaric has nothing now to draw upon to support his people. He does not have access to local taxes. He does not have access to granaries. That means he can't feed his people.
Alaric is now determined to feed his people with Roman grain. And the local Roman garrison can do little to stop him. Emboldened by their success, the Goths now declare Alaric their king.
With Alaric, they become the first barbarian people to create a kingdom inside the empire. Alaric is very important because what he does is really forge the Goths as a single political unit and really create from a band of soldiers a people.
Alaric's Gothic kingdom is unchallenged for now, as the empire faces other, more critical upheavals. In 395 AD, when Emperor Theodosius falls ill and dies, the empire is divided once again. His teenage son Arcadius is made Emperor of the East in Constantinople, and his 10-year-old son Honorius becomes Emperor of the West in Rome. Theodosius's loyal general Stilicho is not forgotten. He becomes the boy emperor Honorius's protector and teacher.
After Theodosius fell ill, it was Stilicho that he turned to for whatever reason. He says to Stilicho, according to one version or the other, that he wants him to be the regent of Honorius.
Inexperienced in the tools of war, young Honorius relies on Stilicho for his expertise and guidance.
Stilicho had a sort of patronizing relationship, a sort of godfather relationship with this child. I think Stilicho always saw Honorius as his little kid.
But Honorius is an indifferent student. Stilicho keeps a keen eye on him. He knows that the future of the empire depends on his control of the boy. In 397 AD, Stilicho secures his hold on Honorius by marrying the young emperor to his daughter.
What he was really interested in is having his grandson be emperor, because he married his first daughter, Maria, to Honorius. So clearly he wanted Honorius's son and his grandson to be emperor. So that would be the only possible way that he could have direct familial influence over the next emperor.
The wedding guests are scandalized at the joining of the royal bloodlines with a barbarian. But Stilicho is oblivious to their anger, seeing himself as Roman to the core. But Stilicho's power in Rome does not extend to the other young emperor, Arcadius, in Constantinople. There